Okay, now we're going to take some questions from the audience, and then we'll close up with these three gentlemen telling you one thing that they really want you to take home tonight. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Okay, let me come down there. And you are?
Doris McFadden.
Doris, okay. There you go.
I would like to address this question to Dr. Wilson. Can you tell us what the success approximately is with the use of the livestock guardians, the certain breeds of dogs like Great Pyrenees, Couvas, and several other of those large European type dogs? Can you tell us what might be going on?
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Thank you for the question. I don't have a good answer right now. The good news, though, is that there is a current PhD research project going on in Montana to actually answer exactly what you ask. And I can get you some of the preliminary results, but it's been about a 4 or 5 year study, and it's looking at this exact question of livestock guard dog breed and numbers of guard dogs. So there's been this question: how many do you need to deter wolves? 2, 3. Do you have to approximate a wolf pack? 7, 8, 9. So yeah, I don't have a good answer yet, but there's some good research coming, and I'm happy to get you that researcher. I think her last name is Young, and she's at Utah State University. So, good question, to be continued. I'll just say that there's some interesting livestock guard dog breeds coming out of Turkey, Kangles and Akbash, and there's the livestock guard dog breeding community is a tight-knit one. There's a lot of expertise there, and I can send you to some of those folks. One last thing, in Montana, some of my friends have started using livestock guard dogs with cattle. We hear a lot about sheep, and that's been going on for centuries in Europe and Asia, and in the U.S. for a long time too. But that's pretty heartening to me to see that. We've got anyway, I could talk more about it, but yeah, I think some encouraging trends. More information coming soon.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions. The first one is for Jim about the collars on the wolves that are reintroduced. They're really big and bulky, and I was just curious on why they had to be so big and if they caused issues for the wolves. Anyway.
So why they have to be so big is it's all battery. The electronics are micro. In order to get enough time, if I liken it to a bucket of water, how many drips can you get out of a bucket of water? It's the same. How many pulses can you get out of a battery? So we need, for efficiencies, we need at least 2 years worth of battery life. And there are guidelines, published guidelines on weight of the telemetry versus weight of the animal. More well within guidelines, and typically I've seen no issue, no different survivorship or restriction of movement or anything from the collars.
Great, thanks. And my second question is for the 2 ranchers. Are there any non-lethal deterrents that you have found that actually work for keeping wolves away from your livestock?
For where we're at here in eastern Arizona and western New Mexico, if there's one that I would say, it's going to be the range riders, and having a guy who's very proficient with the radio telemetry equipment and being able to have an idea of where wolves are, or as Arizona Game and Fish was saying, they to be able to look at them things, have an idea, okay, we may have wolves getting close to us, that, and then something that would help would be for like the Forest Service, the BLM, to be a little more flexible with their, with the grazing schedule, so that if you are, gonna be encountering wolves, that it'll be easier for you to go ahead and move cattle, away from where they are, because a lot of times ranchers are limited by that the grazing schedule says you have to be here right now, and you can't be over there, you can't be over there, you have to be here, and that kind of makes things tough. So, but having a range rider, just having that human presence out there helps. There's some places maybe where there are some people that can, the way their ranch is put together, they can pen stuff up, or not pen stuff up, but be able to put out that flattery at night. That helps, but not every ranch. I mean, it does help, it does work, but out here, again, like when you're coming off the rim right there from Flagstaff, there's a lot of that country. Your pasture might be all rim or all canyon, and it's kind of hard to do that, but it does work where you're able to use it.
Is it the color and the movement, or is it one or the other? It's both?
Yeah,
Either way, yeah.
the color and the movement.
Okay, this question is for,
Have you found anything that has worked?
Could I just jump in and I'll just add that we use a turbo flandry. So we use a poly wire, which has a small metallic wire embedded in the rubber and plastic, and that delivers a shock as well if a wolf touches it with their nose. So it's called an aversion, a novel stimuli. Wolves don't like to go under the fluttering, and so yeah, and then there's the shock piece. So sorry, yeah.
No, that's good.
Just
Yeah.
it's been even more effective than traditional flandry.
I tend to agree with Cisco on the being able to move your cattle. I don't ranch on any federal land, so I wouldn't know about being restricted. My ranch is partially state and almost half private, and so if I need to move cattle, I move cattle. I don't ask somebody permission. I manage that landscape on my own, more or less, within reason, of course. But another thing that I know one producer does, which is very effective, is whenever her cows are going to start calving, prior to them calving, she will ship them by truck a few hundred miles to an area where she knows she's not going to have any conflict with wolves. Does that take other predators out of the equation? No. But she's had a significant enough loss that it's worth it for her to spend thousands of dollars a year to transport her cattle herd and cattle them out in different part of the state where there aren't any conflict with wolves.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, to add to that, both the Defenders of Wildlife and the Mexican Wolf Fund have been more than helpful with many of our ranchers here in Arizona and New Mexico to help with that type of stuff, like the shipping, the flattery, any supplemental feeding you might have to do if you're having to put cattle up. I mean, it's not everybody and not everyone's willing to accept that, because there are some ranchers that will see it as being a sellout to take that money or to take that assistance. But for those ranchers that are willing to accept that assistance, it has been very, very helpful.
This is kind of a combination comment and question, twofold. What you were saying earlier about maybe going back to cattle with horns, I don't know if any of you recall or heard of 25 years ago, there was a ranch in Colorado, and their premise was we've domesticated these cattle so much that they're not defending themselves any longer. And so what he would do is any cow that did not protect her calf, she went to slaughter. So the ones that did protect their calves, that was what he kept breeding. And he had such success, but his neighbors were mad at him, the other ranchers, because it was almost like the predators knew, don't go there, let's go on over here, and they refused to go ahead and kill off the predators. Instead, they tried to get their cows to be more natural in their normal defense. And that kind of relates, I don't know if anybody knows of that ranch, where it was in Colorado, I can't remember. I know it was about 20, 25 years ago, or they, whatever happened to them. And then related to that is predator-friendly beef. My understanding is there's quite a demand for that, and I don't know if that's being implemented at all in Arizona, or what you know about that, because that's a win-win then. Anybody that knows can answer me. Ranchers or...
Casey, there were some ranches in Colorado that were running Longhorn because they were more able to defend themselves. I don't know if that specifically relates to the ranch you're thinking of, but that's been a practice that people have talked about for years, is running wilder, more challenging livestock that are more capable of defending themselves. The problem, of course, is then you've got, as a rancher, manage these wilder, more dangerous cattle.
These were the
They're any more dangerous to people.
Well, it's what people say. They gore each other. I mean, you have more injuries, more problems handling the livestock over
these
time.
were Longhorns, but I had heard of that too. But this was, if Mama didn't try to defend her young, she was gone. And it was getting that natural. Now, they didn't have the wolves back then, or, it was 20, 25 years ago, or at least not that we know of.
I'll say, real quick, I'll say something. It doesn't take the Longhorn. You can have plenty of, you can have Hereford cows that'll turn around and fight, and it's just a matter of selecting that trait. And yeah, a lot of the times I guess the industry tells us not to select away from that, but just like selecting the cattle with horns, I mean, maybe that's something that we can begin to incorporate. Is those cows that will be a little more combative. I don't know what else to call them. And just because they're going to be like that, just because they're going to be a little more willing to defend their babies, in my opinion, don't necessarily mean that they're going to be as hard to handle. Because you can make a polled or a cow born naturally without horns. You can make some polled Angus cow with your bad handling into the meanest thing you've ever seen. So I think those are things. Those are good ideas, and I'm glad you brought that up. And those are maybe some things that we can start to encourage from here out.
I have a question for Seth. When that question, are you still going?
Jim had a comment. Just
Thanks, Mark.
Just a quick comment, horned cattle. We've done some studies on other predators. We talk about wolves here, but we've had predators on the landscape forever and had to manage around that, particularly lions and bears in the Southwest. And horned cattle are better able to defend themselves. That's clearly an issue. But few cattle go to slaughter off of western rangelands. They go to finishing areas in grain-fed areas. That's changed a little bit with the demand for grass-fed beef, but the value of a hornless cow to the feedlots in Nebraska is different than a horned cow. And it just simply, it's a solution to our issue of wolves, but it's not, it costs the rancher some money to change from hornless to horned cows. So there's always going to be some resistance to that. But the fact of the matter is that we've done research studies, and they're more effective at deferring predation. But it's a cost benefit and a risk and return on investment analysis that each rancher has to do for themselves.
And then I guess to add to that, that's something I didn't think of. If you're a rancher that already has a polled herd, it's going to be cost. Like, I'm just used to us there on the reservation where dehorning calves is just part of the work. You dehorn calves, and not every ranch on the reservation does that, but at least where I am, we do. And those ones will be the calves that we're gonna ship, like if there's anything that, well, right now there's kind of some butted heads, because I agree about keeping the cows with horns, but the president of that association doesn't want any horned replacement heifers, so we'll see. Yeah, I forget about that, like what he was saying, that there's other ranches where there's that cost, or maybe that's, again, the overcoming change where they may be so resistant to doing something as adding that dehorning their sale calves and adding that dehorning method, I mean, to their normal working procedures, and just be resistant to that. So that's it.
Okay, my question is set is, can you explain to everybody here, like a bird's eye view of the makeup of the Livestock Loss Board, and maybe one or two programs, additional programs, and the George Edwards role in that?
Okay, the question's about our Montana Livestock Loss Board, which is one of these, technically it's a part of our Montana Department of Livestock. And part of the story behind the formation of the Livestock Loss Board was that the group you've heard today, Defenders of Wildlife in Montana, had paid, this goes way back into the 1990s with wolf reintroduction. Hank Fisher at Defenders of Wildlife felt that a compensation tool was needed for Montana, and so yet they had to raise money year in and year out to do that. And we've heard a little bit about this. Ideologically, some folks don't want to take money from a large national group like Defenders of Wildlife. It's simply against their principle. It's this idea of being sold out or selling out to the sort of the green enemy. So Defenders had carried this program for many years for wolves, but then they decided they needed to turn it over to the state of Montana. And now the state of Montana has taken on, as a Livestock Loss Board, we have taken on compensation for both wolves, grizzly bears, and our governor just signed last week a mountain lion to be included on our 3 species now for compensation claims. We pay 100% for confirmed losses and probable losses. Those investigations to talk about confirmed or probable losses are carried out by APHIS, U.S. Department of Agriculture Wildlife Services. The makeup of our board is we have 4 ranchers, and I am the wildlife agricultural representative on the board, representing how you do both and how we can live in these carnivore-rich environments and maintain viable agricultural operations. Anything else, Mark?
I have a question actually to going back to what Casey asked with the label, talking about return on investment. The research shows, financial research shows, that there is a high demand on predator-friendly meat. People are willing to pay more money. It's the same as here in the US. You guys call certain things organic. Wouldn't be considered organic in the rest of the world, but in the US it's organic. People pay more money for the same product, and both sides are happy. So the same is actually with the predator-free label. Is there something in board for that? Because I do believe, I'm not a vegetarian, and I do believe that if I buy my meat, first of all, I would like to know where it comes from. Second, I would like to actually spend money on what I believe to. If somebody invests money to be predator-friendly, they should have the return on investment. That also will, on the other hand side, just from the economical side, the other ranchers will have to take a look at it at one point and think about where's the value for me? Is it being stubborn, not being open to new ideas? Would I like to get less money for my meat? Or will I start being more, just listen a little bit more, accepting help, because as everybody here said, help is out there for the ranchers. And I do believe, actually, just from the economical side, that the return on investment, if there's a label like this, is huge for the ranching industry.
You know, there is a certified program called Predator Friendly. It's very small. There's a bit of movement in Oregon on this, with Oregon cattle ranchers thinking about how to supply, you know, that west coast market of Portland, where people will pay a higher premium for something that's raised humanely and called, you know, predator-friendly way. Nature Conservancy, one of the largest conservation group in the world. Nature Conservancy briefly flirted with this idea of conservation beef to try to sell conservation-friendly beef to their membership through the mail with, you know, frozen steaks. The big picture, and I think I have been watching this and thinking about this for 20 years, and I have not seen it really scaled up to where it should be or it could be. And I think the conservation community and the entrepreneurial business community, and as you say, if there's research that documents people will pay premium value, if all that's indeed true and there's this great desire for it, why hasn't it happened? And I think the answer is that it's a marketing, it's the systems of shipping and scaling it. I'm not making much sense. It has to come and work for the ranching community. And there's some obstacles out there with contracts and where livestock are finished in the Midwest and in parts of Colorado, and long-term contracts. I think it would be wonderful to see this. I think the only way it will work is if the producers make it work, and if they want to make it work. I don't think it can be imposed on them by the environmental or conservation community, even though it's a great idea.
That's all.
As we think about the economics, I can give you an example of a rancher that we've dealt with. Very progressive rancher, supportive of wolves. The state game and fish just paid him $20,000 the cost of moving his calving herd, which is a small component. And he's lost 16 calves in the past 12 months. So you add all that together, and that gentleman has had an effect of almost $40,000 on his herd. So the cost that we'd have to pay, and I'm not arguing for or against that concept, but from a very practical standpoint, this gentleman has incurred $40,000 of demonstrated cost from wolves on his property.
What is he doing wrong? He's lost 16 animals on one property. What is he doing wrong?
He has 2 wolf packs right on him. There's a lot of things that we're talking about. Again, he's a progressive rancher, but he has had wolves. We heard the story of the boneyard. I think wolves have learned that his calves are there, and that things like flattery, range riding have been ineffective for him. So he was willing to move his cattle, and part of the difficulty we talked about is being able to go from one pasture to another pasture, the inflexibility of livestock rotation. I will tell you that we have in Arizona demonstrated 98 depredations in 2016, and those are the ones that have been determined. Arizona is full of places like Hell's Half Acre and Deep Canyon, and trying to find these animals is difficult. I think that again, focusing on the cost of the benefit of the utility of predator-free beef, it's going to be a difficult sell on some western landscapes because we ranch different here than a lot of other areas. So just as a perspective, that's what his financial costs have been. You spoke, and I think I know who you spoke, who moves her cattle from Springerville south. You know, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars to move herds of cattle. And the ranchers are willing to do it, but they need some compensation to help with that, because that's an added cost to them with the introduction of wolves.
You know, I would just say, you know, Oliver, too, your question is a little loaded, you know, and I might just ask, you know, what happened before I would say what went wrong. I just don't, you know, I just don't know. You couldn't hear? I would just ask the question, what happened?
16's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of animals to lose.
And we've had these so-called, you know, we call them, you know, the train wrecks in Montana as well.
You mean the sheep wrecks?
We've had some serious issues with sheep. We've had losses. We've had some high losses with cattle. Alberta has got high losses with cattle, particularly yearling operations, when you can get, you know, dozens of losses to bears and to wolves. They're very naive. You know, they don't have mothers protecting them. I think it's important in this whole business to be just open-minded and be curious about what is happening and what can be done to improve it.
That particular ranch, he's had a problem with depredation. It wasn't like just, bam, we have 16. He's had ups and downs over the last several years since the process started. So, I mean, it didn't go from nothing to 16. It was, what did you have last year? I mean, it's probably...
He had just a handful last year.
Yeah.
He had a pack of wolves. He was calving. He wasn't, his cows were. They were having calves, and a pack of wolves got into the pasture, were unwilling to leave, in spite of range riders, in spite of flattery. The only solution was to move. And it's a behavior of a particular pack of wolves, much the same as the boneyards that we heard about. They found baby calves, and he's a good rancher. You know, he's progressive. He tries everything that he can. And fortunately, it happened on a rancher that values wolves for their presence. Other ranchers might have other people might have dealt with that pack differently, but he was pretty progressive. But it is an example of what can happen to a good rancher when wolves settle in on that particular pasture. We need the flexibility to be able to help them move. We need some flexibility in our federal partners in this to allow them the flexibility to move. Managing around livestock depredations is a serious challenge on both sides of the coin.
I do agree with that, but that brings the whole discussion on a political level. Because now we go back to finances, right? Every state, federal, state law, on every level there should be a budget for everything. And yet, even knowing that the US tried to introduce wolves, there is not enough budget set aside. To me, as a businesswoman, this is very poor planning. To me, as a businesswoman, people like this actually do not survive out doing business. As you said, it is to adapt. And I do agree, ranchers that had problems with wolves, they need support. Yes, this is true. And support should be there. But there is enough money around. There's enough taxpayer money around that just gets not budgeted appropriate to where it should actually be and where it belongs to, right? But this is then on the next political level that I would have to take on with the next panel on higher level to talk about their way of creating and managing budgets.
I have a follow-up question just about this particular ranch, just for our enlightenment. What's the availability of wildlife sources of food for these wolf packs that are on this ranch's property?
What we found is a high level of overlap between our best elk populations. Elk simply are the diet for Mexican wolves. And he has lots of elk on his property too. We find very, very low density wolves and a few wolf packs outside of our best elk range. So it was not an issue that there were no native ungulates there.
I'm not sure who this gentleman is, but I have a pretty good idea of who or where. And just as he said, in a place like that, where it goes back to I mean, there's the people that want to see him as the devil, and there's other people that want to see it as cuddly stuffed animals, and the truth is somewhere in between. Like that particular pack there, they just like Boneyard thing. Maybe they were depredating on that elk herd, and then all of a sudden they come up on this where it's a lot easier to take that beef calf than it is to take that elk calf, and I know that firsthand because I used to be an intern for Tribes Game and Fish Department, and we used to radio collar elk calves, and them cow elk, they're dangerous. they'll come and get you.
You know, we found over the years in Montana, you know, the proximity of a den site to livestock matters, especially if you have a large litter of pups you're trying to feed, and it becomes harder to find, you know, ungulates, elk. So you might see some prey switching over to livestock. We've seen, you know, this whole question like, when does a wolf learn to start killing livestock? It's sort of interesting. You know, we've had situations where a calf is tangled up in a woven wire fence and extremely vulnerable, and a wolf just happens to be there. You know, it's just the timing stinks, and then it's, ooh, they're so smart, they learn. And they might visit this place again to see, do we have any more vulnerability here? And I don't know what triggers or starts the situation, but I do know and have seen this, that it can get repeated, and this is you know, an unfortunate, but it's an unfortunate situation that does happen.
If you give me one last little quick second. I believe predation is a function of risk and benefit. And if you're able to find a young calf, the risk to you as a wolf is eminently smaller than the risk to trying to kill an adult elk. And one of the things that we see is the timing, and this is, you could be more right about politics and wolves, but ranchers try and have their calves as early in the year as they can, because that all counts as size and the time that they're on their federal permits. So this train wreck all happened at the time that there were few young elk. So your risk is you got to try and kill an adult elk, which is high risk, as opposed to a young calf that, while defended by their mom, is still much lower risk than trying to kill an elk. So it's lack of available native ungulates, at the same time, optimal production of calves.
I have a follow-up toward your question about the question of how that gets paid for. You spoke about tax money, and part of the answer to that is the reason why the subject is kind of near and dear to me. The people that are raising that food, I've heard that 1% feeds the other 99% or something like that. Okay, if one guy loses $40,000, or if 400 people lose $100, where's the most noise made? Probably the 400. So there's so few people that are footing that bill that they have a fairly small voice.
Tell us about the compensation a little bit. You know, 40 grand's a lot of money. What was the compensation to this rancher?
I've never taken any compensation, so I don't know anything about it.
Well, what they do, and this is a challenge that we have in managing, and I think Cisco will agree, that the payments are you can pay up to 75% of the value of that animal. Well, I'm not a shrewd mathematician, but at least 25% that's uncompensated for right at the start. That doesn't attribute many of the things you saw Cisco, lower weaning rates, lower conception rates, and the fact that they can't find, the farmers can't, ranchers can't find all the animals. So he was paid for 75% of what he lost, and $20,000 was his actual cost to move the livestock. But at the outset, you've lost 25% for every calf that you've lost.
Can I just ask, I know you're desperate to ask it, but you pointed out a rancher that you know, that when her cows are ready to go in calf, she ships them somewhere safe. So how come this guy didn't know when his cows were coming into calf and put them in an enclosure or something that he could keep an eye on them? Is that not possible? If this rancher that he knows can do that, is that not possible?
It depends on where you are. And back to what he said earlier about farming cattle and ranching cattle, out here or down here in the Southwest, it takes significantly more rangeland to take care of one cow. So you measure it in like acres per cow. Whereas you get to Montana and then into the Great Plains, it's cows per acre.
But the rancher you know is also in this area?
Yes, I think it has to do with, in this particular, if we're going to compare apples to apples, it's a scale thing. The particular rancher that lost 16, he has a significantly greater number of acres and just land mass and cattle specifically to manage than the person that is able to, the person that moves all of those cattle every year, they are like, there's a couple hundred of them, and every one of them has a name. So
And the other guy, he does have a bigger ranch, and one of his pastures might be the size as his whole ranch.
So then presumably he's got a bigger herd, so 16 is a smaller percentage, so it's not that big a deal anyway.
Well, it's
Just
still
from a business point.
Yeah.
if we're thinking about, I kind of look at it from a little bit different perspective, because did it take less of our resources to produce those 16 head of calves as opposed to somebody else's 16 head of calves?
But any business is a numbers game, so if it's a percentage, I mean, I'm in a totally different business. I build websites, I have my own web server. We get hundreds of attacks on that server every day. Nobody compensates me for it, but it's something I have to take care of. It's predation of a different sort. I'm not allowed to go and shoot the guy that's trying to hack the server.
No, those are valid points. I got to just tell you a quick story. It just reminded me when we were talking about moving your entire calving area out of harm's way. You know, when I was in my 20s, I'm doing all this GIS mapping of calving areas throughout Montana, and you know, these bears are coming down these river and creek bottoms. They smell the afterbirth. They get into this calving areas. And many times they won't kill anything. Other times they do. And you know, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, couldn't you just move your calving area just half mile up out of the river bottom? And you know, I quickly realized, you know, you start treading on some very tricky terrain with the ranching community about, you know, what they can do and what they can't do, or what they don't want to do. And you know, we came to the conclusion that fencing those calving areas with high-powered permanent electric fences was a solution, at least in the intro.
Okay,
I'm not answering your question, Timon, but it just you know, I just think it's a very important. If you're not a rancher, you're not a farmer, you're not a producer, I just think it's very important not to assume we have the answers for those operations. It may seem easy, but in practice, it's very difficult and it's very site-specific. Even in the valley where I work, one rancher on the north side of the valley has a very different situation than just a rancher just 10 miles away. So this is again where this idea of talking and learning from each other and going into these difficult questions with an open mind, with a curious mind, with an empathetic mind can get us to solutions before we judge one another.
Okay, one last question.
I think one of the things that first got me interested in wolves and their role in the ecosystem was the story of Yellowstone and what got them introduced back in the first place. And I think the common ground for all of this is a love for wildlife and wild places and animals in particular. And does that story still resonate? Or is it just, that's nice that I have a business to run? I mean, the fact that they do keep ungulates on the move and they were responsible as a science found out, it was the loss of the aspen trees that led them to find out that it was related to when the last wolves were in Yellowstone. So the aspen came back and the riparian zones came back, the fish came back, and the songbirds, and the whole ecosystem's turned around. And is that just too nice? But I've got a business to run. Is there a point where that adds value, to where that value might have its big point that outweighs, I lost a calf, but look at the balance of the ecosystem on my ranch as a whole, and how that's improved now that a keystone predator's back on.
Do you want one of our thoughtful ranchers here to answer that question?
I'd open that up. I know it's an interesting perspective, and it may be too much of an inside story.
It's a big question. It's a good question.
I don't know how to answer that really well, but I'll say this. Where I live right now used to be a ranch. Where I live right now, I remember going there with my dad and my uncles because, I mean, it's a pretty large ranch, and they'd have spoiled cattle in there, and the rancher would hire my dad to go gather those cows. Now I live there. Now a bunch of people live there. Now it's like 2, 3, 5 acre plots. It's not. It's fragmented now. It's not like it used to be. Where I work on the reservation, I can make a lot more money doing something else. I can make a hell of a lot more money doing what this gentleman does right here with his computer work. But I like knowing that where I work, where I live, where I'm part of, that area right there is never going to be subdivided. That's always going to stay wild. And that's why I'm there. Again, like, I guess what did you say? The sublime, what was it? Splendid isolation. Yeah, and so it is important. And despite what I said earlier, yes, there are those individuals that a dollar is a bottom line, but there's a lot more people like him, like me, that if you can just break even, and if we can just keep living the way we do and be part of things the way we are, and accept that wolves are back, and that we have to do what we can to when I say live with them, I'm not going to say like live with them. I mean like live with them on this landscape, because we all have our place here. And so there are those of us like that. And I think with what our discussion is right here, kind of got shoved into that direction back to what we were talking about earlier, where the conglomerates, the big ranches, the big farms, and what those guys are about. And for many of us, it is just what you said. We know that they're there. I mean, there are there are other ranchers that I know of. They don't like elk. They don't want elk on their ranches. Elk, they tear down fences. They compete with my cattle. I don't like them here. No, I'm not one of those. You know, I like seeing them. I like the other morning when, actually, what was it? about a month ago when we got waken up at 3:30 in the morning because there was a bull headed down right next to the master bedroom, banging his antlers on the wall. I like that, you know. I'm not one of those other people who thinks that all these resources are for me and for me to put into production. It's, I mean, all of them have their place, and if we can all have our place, because we're humans and we're part of this too. Just like wolves are, just like the elk are, just like mule deer, just like brown-tailed chub, just like, I don't know, Sonora suckers, desert suckers, any of those animals. And that's, I mean, I guess that's what helps me to keep going, because you do get wrapped up in that. You do get people asking you those mean questions, like you were saying earlier. A lot of times we come to meetings like this, and it's scary. It's awful. There was one meeting at the Honda Casino near Pine Top. I was in there, and I felt like I was getting sick or something. I felt like I was like, man, I guess it is flu season or something. And I walked outside, and I realized it's just in there. It's all that energy from both sides, you know. The people that were the avid anti-rancher, anti-hunter, they were all angry. The ranchers that are like anti-whatever, anti-everything, they were all angry. And that wasn't, I don't know, that's not pleasant. But anyway, back to your question. There are those of us, we do recognize that. I mean, I'm sorry that things got, I don't know, sidetracked and kind of directed at this one individual who had this big loss and making it about the dollars and cents for that guy, because that's not what the whole thing's about. There are those of us like that, and I'm grateful to be able to come to a place like this and to meet people like you who are more open to those of us that maybe have a little different perspective, maybe very different perspective, but we're all sharing this place. And so, yeah.
That's hard to follow. But one thing that we need to remember when we think about, you know, striking that balance, and at what point does the benefit to our ecosystem balance out with the economics, and what sacrifice were we willing to make? The one particular rancher, he had done other things to, he you know, had range riders, he had flagery out. So the only other thing he could think of to do was move the cattle. One of the things that we need to remember in our arid landscape is the recovery of our country, our rangeland, is much slower. We have a very short growing season, especially in the high country of Arizona. And so if I wanted to fence in all of my cows just during calving season, going back and looking at the environment, what did fencing those cattle into that smaller spot, what problems did that create? And how long does that country then need to recover? And so can I do that 1 year? That might work this year. And it's going to cost me how much to fence in this piece of land, but am I going to be able to do that next year? Probably not. So thinking of those solutions, there's nothing that is going to be a blanket. It's very site specific.
If I could add just a quick bit. You spoke about the ecological benefit of the presence of wolves, the recovery of streams, the re-emergence of aspen. All of those seemingly are societal benefits. And while I'm not a rancher, I'm on speed dial to many of them. And the question is, if those are societal goods, why doesn't society pay the freight for those benefits? Why, as a landowner, as an operator, do I have to pay out of my pocket for the societal good? They point out that this isn't, I'm just saying what people are telling me, this is not my value system, so be open-minded. This is what folks tell me, and you know, I'm not here defending pro-wolf, anti-wolf, but their question to me on a regular basis is, should I have to pay for societal benefits that extend outside of my private property? And that's just food for thought.
But I would ask that person, especially if they were grazing on public land, why I'm paying for them to graze their cattle at below market rates by about $8 per cow-calf pair. I would ask them why I'm paying for APHIS and Wildlife Services to come and remove predators that I treasure for their private personal profit. You know, there's that knife cuts both ways.
And
I am the one that's paying all the time. Every tax payment, I'm paying for things which I abhor, where I'm not benefiting in any way from those private operations. And culturally, historically, the West was one to pave the way for people to put their livestock on the land. It was carved up, the laws were written to fully benefit Western livestock and extractive industry interests. And as I stated, my family was in this business in a very big way. So it's not like my hands are clean. But I understand that there's these costs that people continue to ignore, and then they say, why am I the one that has to pay so much for these darn wolves? Well, I've been paying my whole life for you to have your operation.
Excellent points. My point was simply that there are so many perspectives on this issue that it's not simple. And we need to respect your value system, the ranching value system, and others in recognizing that it is a complex social issue that is difficult for those of us that are in management positions to try and deal with. There are no simple answers. It's a complex issue what I said was that's what ranchers tell me as part of the issue.
And I do agree with